as amidst the ongoing G7 summit in Canada, the leaders of the G7 nations have released a joint statement that is on countering migrant smuggling and enhancing border enforcement and also dismantling the transnational organized crime groups. While the statement has read, and I quote, that we, the leaders of the G7, reaffirm our commitment to prevent and counter migrant smuggling through the G7 coalition to prevent and counter the smuggling of the migrants, and the 2024 G7 action plan to prevent and counter the smuggling of migrants. We are determined to enhance the border management and enforcement and dismantle the transnational organized crime groups profiting from both migrant smuggling and human trafficking, unquote. While Megha joins me live on the broadcast, and in fact, at this point of time, she continues to be with us from Canada. The statement that I've just read, Megha, focuses on countering the transnational challenges. What more can you add on that?
Well, that has been the overarching theme of the G7 Leaders Summit. Even when the G7 working session was, G7 working leaders working session that was commenced and introduced by Mark Carney, which was on day 2, which was on June 16th. He made a remark, said that the G7 nations need to work together and cooperate when it comes to fighting transnational crime. And he also particularly spoken about how there needs to be supply chains that need to be built aggressively for critical minerals. He's talking about artificial intelligence, he's talking about quantum computing, and how global economies, democracies, the biggest and the most powerful ones that were gathered under one roof in the last few days, have to come together to help each other for the common good, for global good, and for the humanity. And these thoughts have been penned down in the joint statement that has been signed by the G7 signatories, as well as the outreach nations leaders who were also present. So again, transnational repression, particularly a concern, because, and on top of it, we're talking about immigration enforcement agencies. Canada continues to follow the stringent action that has been taken by the Trump administration in the last few months against illegal immigration. This is something that Trump would like replicated in Canada as well. In fact, there had been a number of times that the Trump administration had warned Canada of ensuring its borders were sealed and protected. And if that was not done, there would be heavy tariffs that the Carney administration will have to suffer. And keeping that in account, Mark Carney has taken a lot of these stringent actions, particularly against immigration, and that is for all to see. And I think that's also one of the many aspects, facets of the joint communique, the joint statement that has been signed by the leaders.
All right, in fact, Megha, as we are also delving into what happened behind the summit, at the G7 summit in Canada, G7 leaders have raised alarm over the rising transnational repression that my colleague Megha has just pointed out. And in a joint statement, they have said that such acts threaten sovereignty, human rights and global law. G7 calls for joint action to counter this foreign interferences targeting the dissidents and the diaspora communities. All right, now Megha continues to be with us as the G summit has come amidst the time of the rising geopolitical tensions, Megha, including the escalating tensions between the Middle East in the wake of the strikes of Iran and Israel. And there is also a trade war triggered by US President Donald Trump's on the tariff policies. As far as G7 summit is concerned, leaders have called for a coordinated global action. What does this mean for, in fact, all these persistent issues that are coming up at this point of time?
Yes, I think the big highlight of the G7 Leaders Summit in the last 3 days has, of course, been the US President Donald Trump leaving it midway. This time not because he was upset or angry or through a temperamental fit, but because of the escalating Middle East crisis. and the war that refuses to abate between India and between Israel and Iran. And it was for that reason that he decided to call short his visit and leave the G7 summit at Kananaskis and headed back to his situation room where he had called an urgent meeting with his National Security Council. But besides that, of course, tariff was the biggest focus point from Trump's point of view. I think tariffs and trade negotiations were top of the agenda, and Trump managed to make this the biggest highlight of the G7 summit, and he was able to, in fact, negotiate. US, UK, and US have finally signed a trade deal with the proclamation that was signed by the two leaders at the G7 summit. There is a 30-day deadline that has now been set for going through the nitty-gritties and coming up with a finalized trade deal between Canada and the United States. Even European Union has been assured that by July 12th there is going to be a draft that is going to be ready for the two heads of the states to sign it and allow for a mutually beneficial agreement to be brought about. So yeah, I think and if Trump had been present for the remainder of the G7 summit, which was on June 17, he would have continued to hold these bilaterals and pull aside with India and South Korea and Japan. In fact, Japan he did, and Japan there came out and said that there is so far no negotiation that has been at this point in time, discussed or come to a consensus. So and then yeah, there are other nations, Brazil, Mexico, they all want to deal with Trump, and Trump would like that as well. So yeah, I would say I think trade deals were the biggest winners for America and the respective nations with which America is doing these trade deals.
Right, in fact, Megha, as she also shares more than what is just the headlines are picking up at this point of time at the G7.